Good evening and welcome everyone to our viewers. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. This is our 9th Safari Talk episode with African Bush Camps. My name is Beks Ndlovu. I am the founder and CEO of African Bush Camps, and we operate a series of safari camps in remote locations in Zimbabwe, Botswana, Zambia. And today we have some colleagues who we've been working with for many years and have really been supporting us as we have grown over the last 16 years. And in fact, I've been working with SATAB probably for over 20 years now. So I'm very pleased to be able to have these guys and talk and really attend to the things that are current and the things that are at the surface of what we all need to know given the changes with the pandemic introduced over the last few months. If you want to continue following us on Safari Talks, we're going to be changing this to Safari TV. So we're very excited about that. If you want to learn a lot more about that, please follow us, African Bush Camps YouTube channel. We're also on Facebook and, of course, Instagram and Twitter. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel banner that you will see. If you go through to that, we'll be able to communicate, and particularly some of our Instagram feeds and shows. We are now starting to only show just a little bit of an insight into what we're going to be talking about, but the full show, at least the discussion, will be on our YouTube channel. We'll be pleased for you to subscribe so that we can share some of these amazing talks with the professionals that make a very big difference to our businesses. So today we really want to address some of the questions that our audience has, which is what do we do when our family member is out traveling in some remote locations, or at least for the trade? What do we do when we have some of their guests in these remote locations and something goes wrong? Because something going wrong is not a question of will it go wrong, it's a question of when. Hopefully, very few times, but it's always good to have the professionals on standby so that we can either mitigate or save the day. So today we'll tackle the requirements for in-camp medical and evacuation procedures, and to get to grips really with what it takes to make a remote luxury camp or location a safe place for anyone to travel to should they need medical attention. So joining me today is James of ACE. He also runs an organization called Halsted Aviation. In fact, we've been in partnership on the flying side with James for over 8 years. So James, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And of course, we've got Sawyer, who is the CEO of Special Projects and Services involved in SATAB 24, who I've personally worked with for over 20 years. So I think the gentlemen are best placed to introduce themselves. So James, perhaps we can start with you. If you can just give us a little bit of an insight into who you are, your organization, and how you've ended up at this talk this evening. And Simon, if you can follow thereafter, that would be great.
Sure.
Thanks, Beks. Hi, Simon. Hi, Beks. Thanks. Firstly, it's an honor to be on your show. Very, very few times we get invited on to discuss these kind of topics. So thanks very much, and welcome to all the viewers, and hope that we can sort of dispel any bad myths or make sure that you're protected when you're on safari. I'm the managing director of a company called ACE Ambulance, as well as Halsted Aviation, and as Beks has said, we've been providing services for well over 8 years. So we've had a fantastic relationship with African Bush Camps, and we provide primarily charters for most of the clients that are coming into African Bush Camps on the Zimbabwean side. And we also have a company which is called ACE Air and Ambulance, which basically operates a fleet of 3 fixed-wing aircraft for basically air ambulances, as well as a helicopter remote rescue service based in Zimbabwe. We service the region, so our furthest reach has been Uganda, and we take care of most of the safari incidents that take place. One of our greatest accolades is that we're URAMI certified, which is basically a European Aeromedical Institute accreditation, which basically governs regulations revolving around air ambulance work in European areas. We were nominated as a finalist in the Global Air Ambulance of the Year award in 2017. So some good credentials there, taking care of you. We have, over the last 5-6 years, been conducting all the medical first aid training with the guides in camp. So all the guides that have been that work in African bush camps, particularly in Zimbabwe, have been trained by our specialists, and they know how to take care of situations that occur in camp. I know there should be a few pictures that should be coming up on your screen, so have a look at those, and that hope to give you a bit of an indication of what it is that we do and how we keep you safe on safari.
Grateful for that. Thank you very much, James. It probably should be noted that some of those images that you see that might look quite gruesome, that is all an act. So I'm sure there's a lot of, what do you use for blood, James? What is that I could see that's supposedly?
Well, firstly, I'm glad that there's no facial images there, because that would have been against our policy. But on this specific photo, that was taken on a training. So this is what happens typically every year. In fact, in the case of African bush camps, we conduct these trainings every 6 months. And we do real field training exercises where the guides and staff camp members are all sort of put through rigorous sort of trauma training, which really sets the men from the mice, you know.
Yeah, that's great. The staff are very grateful for that, and it certainly gives us a lot of confidence that our staff are trained every 6 months, and of course are on the ball should an incident arise. And thankfully, we haven't really had to deal with any incidents that are of serious threat out in the field for us. But certainly, all our guides are very well equipped, all our management staff, and particularly, you know, going forward with COVID training, which we'll talk about shortly after Simon. It's really appreciated to have professionals come in and say, look, the protocols are such, you know, going forward. And we'll talk about the new norm. But Simon, do you want to maybe just give us a little bit of an intro? I always say somebody like you, Simon, your organizations, you're the first guys that we get on the phone to, and having ready access to professionals 24 hours, no matter what time of the day, has certainly been great, even if it's just to check in when a guest is worried, and it gives people peace of mind. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit more about where you see yourself fitting also in the context of what James's organization does?
Sure, no problems. And it's great that you use our service. Thanks, Beks. So to give you a background of how we fit into all of this then. So my name's Simon Sawyer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for a company called Special Projects and Services, SPS. So SPS is a risk management company, and we were established in 1991, so coming up for 30 years now. So we specialize in providing evacuation services and incident management to the insurance market and corporate clients on a global basis. So that literally is everywhere. So we're covering jobs in Beirut following the recent blast, all the way across to South America and obviously in Africa. So the term evacuations covers, for us, it doesn't just cover medical evacuations. We also deal with security and natural disaster as well as the medical. And everything's controlled by that one central hub, as you mentioned, which is our operation center, which runs 24 hours a day. So what would happen is the call would come into us, and then we would provide that remote incident management, which is the advice to stabilize the casualty. And in the background, what we do then is we find the most appropriate resource to assist in the evacuation process. So quite often we use James's services when we're in Zimbabwe, and it could be someone else if we were in Papua New Guinea or wherever it happens to be. But the beauty of it is that the lodge doesn't have to worry about having a big database of dozens of different service providers. They can all just come into us, and we manage that process for us. So how we came to work together is through SATAB. And if you're a SATAB policyholder, you have access to SATAB 24, which is a membership which allows you as a policyholder access to the operation center, ensuring you have a direct line to a team of doctors, nurses, and security professionals in a crisis. And as I say, we're able to gain an appraisal of that situation, be it a missing person or a bushfire, provide that immediate kind of advice, or if it's a medical incident, provide that immediate advice for the stabilization, and then start managing multiple resources and responses in order to provide the best possible outcome. I think that pretty much sums it up there, Beks. Yeah.
Thanks, Simon. Our businesses, yours included, have obviously had to go through a transition during this period of time. We talk about what our businesses look like, 5 months ago, and what our businesses look like today going forward. Everything from training all our staff and really improving on our health and sanitization of all our camps, just general sort of hygiene care of not just our staff, but also the way in which we go about preparing rooms, preparing main area, the way we go about serving our food, everything from masks to sanitizers, and including one of the things that we're looking at, which James, you would know about, where we are looking at employing a health officer in each of our remote locations, so that all of these things that we're doing, whether it's testing staff once a day or twice a day, before they come to camp, before guests actually are received in the camps, etc., all of these new things that we've had to adapt to are really sort of the order of the day, if I may call it that. Could you maybe tell us a little bit, whilst we're with you, Simon,
Sure.
What are you gearing up for in the new norm? What are some of the changes that you're looking at that you've put in place that are going to be activated, certainly for us, as soon as we welcome our first guest, of which we'll be welcoming some of our local guests in Botswana, by the way, mid-August, and of course Zimbabwe and Zambia, 1st of September. We're very excited about that, but can't wait for our international guests to start coming once our borders open. What can we look forward to as part of the services which we've got access to should we need them?
Sure. Okay, well, that's a great question. So I think to bring it all back, the expectation hasn't changed. So at the end of the day, you'd still like to be able to pick up the phone, call in an incident, and have that response there straight away. And so that expectation hasn't changed. What's changed is the way we operate. So if we're doing say an international medevac, there's extra processes which we now have to go through, and we're adopting those processes now already, and we're already providing these international evacuations. This could include, they're a lot more complicated, so it could include now notification to embassies, local health authorities. We have to prove that there isn't a medical facility in the host country that can accept that patient. All of this sort of stuff is just extra steps which we have to do. The positive thing is we're already doing it at the moment. So for reassurance, we've just had since March to now where we've been evacuating people still with COVID from various countries to their home countries, and it's just an extra process that we have to go through. But for the guest, they can, and the customer, the expectations are still the same. You can still pick up the phone and you can still provide that evacuation service for them.
Great. And how does that, speaking to your changes, James, what is it that we can expect? I'm assuming from a technical perspective in terms of equipment, there's a lot of shift and changes happening in your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with what Simon said. The expectations have not changed. I mean, the beauty of our business is we've been luckily been able to operate during COVID, and probably more so, we've had probably the most three of the busiest months that we've actually had in history. So, people are tending to act quickly with evacuations rather than delay to the last moment. So, because the procedures that are taking time, everything's still going ahead, but it's just taking a little bit longer than normal. But the good news is, Simon said, we're making it work. We know the channels. We've tried and tested, and this is happening. So it will continue to happen. Obviously, what is the new norm? That's the big question, right? And I think everyone's just got to play their part in being careful. And And obviously, we're gearing up in terms of getting isolation pods available to transport COVID-positive patients, certainly within country to areas of excellence as well as cross-border. So it's a bit of a process because movement of critical equipment from first world countries has been rather slow because of obviously the crisis that we're dealing with in their countries. So
just on that, when you talk about isolation pods, to the average person like myself, that's not medically trained or oriented, can you just describe what an isolation pod is?
So this pod is specifically it's a negative pressure chamber, which you basically isolating the patient from the medical crew in the aircraft. So you can transport where there's negative pressure, so that you haven't got as a high risk of spreading COVID throughout the cabin. But hopefully this is not what you're going to need, Beks.
Hopefully
I
not.
think the reality is, I think that COVID's going to be with us for some time, and we're going to face these issues of people coming into camps that are potentially positive, and will be requiring evacuation, not COVID related, but through some other emergency, and that's where we've sort of taken the decision to gear up for that, so that we can't exclude somebody because they're COVID positive patient.
I think James. Sorry, Beks. I was going to say, I think you hit the nail on the head there with the remote launches about the time factor. So if you're able to identify that situation as early as possible, it allows us more time to react and move them from that remote environment to an urban location where they can have that medical facility, which is key, really. So it brings it right back to the staff being able to identify the symptoms, realize what's happening, and then start that procedure as early as possible. I think that's key at the moment. So that's probably the new norm. Whereas before we may have sat on it for a little bit longer, now we need to call it in earlier.
Yeah, and I think it all boils down to how well trained your staff are on the ground, and certainly for us, as I mentioned earlier on, having that health officer who's a registered trained nurse, to be able to identify some of those characteristics of whatever it might be, really does go a long way into not only just making sure that the guest on site is transported or handled appropriately, but also for the safety of your crews. Now, when we talk about removing people from a site, let's say in the case of a COVID situation, certainly in the last 6 weeks, I've been very fortunate enough to see and travel around some of the countryside and inspect some properties around the Cape that are registered quarantine facilities, because a lot of the questions that our guests are asking, and of course the trade wants to know, is if all of a sudden one of our guests is tested positive of having COVID-19, are they going to be stuck in some city hotel or some government hospital with very poor facilities? So a lot of people very cleverly have established all of these quarantine centers where people can go in isolation and spend 2 weeks in the countryside and actually enjoy being out there. So it becomes an extension of their holidays. Is that sort of, are you seeing more and more of that, James, around Zimbabwe and any of the other jurisdictions that you're operating in? And Simon, have you heard of other countries that are doing this similar thing?
Sure. Go on, James, after you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think, there's a number of private facilities in Zimbabwe that have become sort of isolation centers. So, Zimbabwe in true style is really geared up, and I think it's fantastic. The only problem is with our borders being closed right now. It's sort of mostly repatriations that are coming into these centers because international tourism is not on the cards at the moment.
I agree. I think it's a little early to say how it's going to pan out with the future when international tourism starts. I think it's fantastic that we've got government facilities. There's private facilities in most countries which we deal with. But unfortunately, at the moment, we're still very early days. And so it really depends on a case-by-case basis where we're being advised on where to go due to bed spaces and everything else. But I think in the future, it's definitely going to be something which is pre-identified and moving towards in the right direction.
So and Simon, I mean, you being involved not just in the medical space, you're also, of course, related to the insurance company SATIB, who a lot of us use.
Sure.
You know, one of the questions from our audience is asking is that are these, you know, are there insurance companies that will cover people coming, say, from the US or from the UK or from Europe, if all of a sudden somebody is caught up and they're in Harare or caught up and they're in Cape Town and they have to check into an isolation or quarantine place for 2 weeks? Who pays for that? And I'm assuming that there's insurance companies that are now going to be able to insure their guests, because one of the conditions of travel with us is that all our guests must have full comprehensive travel insurance. Now, whilst some insurance companies may, to begin with, exclude COVID-19 related cases, I'm pretty sure that very quickly it's going to be something that a lot of insurance companies actually cover. What's your experience of that? And do you think that SATIB may be able to offer for our clients or agents that little bit of a tag? Is that something that you can see insurance companies in Africa maybe gravitating towards in order to cover people so that that cost element is taken care of?
Thanks, Beks. Look, that's a really hot topic at the moment around the whole of the insurance market, not just in Africa, but globally. And I know Lloyd's of London are struggling to keep up with it at the moment because obviously they've suffered some huge losses during the pandemic. In terms of who's going to pay for quarantine, who's going to pay for the repatriation, and if it's due to COVID-19, that's going to depend on the individual insurance policy at the time. Is SATIB working on something? I know they are working something at the moment. I know they're in lots of talks with various different underwriters within the London market to try and find the best solution for their customers. But at the moment, it's still very much, it's all up in the air at the moment until international travel picks up again and Lloyd's decides whether they're going to include COVID-19 as the pandemic or how it's going to move forward.
Great, thanks. That's really helpful, Simon. So just in general, and starting with you, James, the general sort of response, can you give perhaps our audience some kind of indication of how things work? I get on the phone immediately. I need some advice from Simon. That discussion happens. And at some point, they get into a discussion with you. Action happens. Maybe we should start with Simon so that we're doing this systematically. What is the general response plan? What does it actually look like? And what sort of timeframes can this be activated?
Sure. Okay. So, there's a couple of answers there. So first of all, SATIB 24 provides incident management for any type of case. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a medical case. In terms of what does a response plan look like? Well, let's talk about the plan and then we'll talk about how we call it into SATIB, if that's okay. So to start with then, as you know, Africa Bush Camps does, they'll have general response plans in place. So a general response plan is different to a medical emergency response plan, as you know. A general response plan covers all possible emergencies, the consequences, the required actions, the written procedures and resources available. So it covers everything from missing persons, fire, floods, gas leaks, traffic accidents, dangerous animals, all of that sort of stuff. Within that response plan, the current thinking really defines 4 phases, which is the emergency management, the mitigation, the preparedness, response, and then the recovery. So I know that Africa Bush Camps and a lot of other policyholders within Zimbabwe have these in place, and they will generally follow the line of communications, the resources and the assets available, the safety and the security and the staff responsibilities. And generally what they look like is a flowchart. And you'll have them in your camps and you'll say, okay, if this type of emergency happens, you know, it could go one of 2 ways, depending on the severity. If it goes this way, then you need to do X, Y, and Z. And generally, SATIB 24 will fit into that response plan, regardless of the type of incident, because we're there to help assist and coordinate any type of incident which you may have. So that could be a large bushfire on the reserve sweeping across, which could affect one of your properties. In which case, you could go down. Is there a danger to life? Is there a danger to property? Okay, we need to notify SATAB, from the insurance perspective. But also, if we notify SATAB 24, then what happens there is we take over the management of the incident for you. So that basically saves your resources, and we can help coordinate that. So to bring it back to say a medical case. If you had some form of medical case, what would happen is you would call the SATAB 24 emergency hotline. You'd come through to one of our response coordinators. Okay, the response coordinator would take down some basic details to start with. Your name, your location, and details about the incident. What they're doing is they're triaging the incident so we can work out the severity of the incident or what type of response we're going to need. If it's determined that we need some form of physical medical response, okay, then that's where one of our logistics team is going to get onto ACE, okay, and we're going to be briefing ACE on the case. That's happening onto the site. Concurrent activity is one of our response coordinators, one of the medical team, is then passing that stabilization advice to the guide or whoever it happens to be. That basic stabilization to keep them alive until James's team come in. So we've briefed up James on the type of case, what's going on, the requirements, and at that point there, I'm going to hand the ball over to you, James, so you can pick up and run from there.
Sure.
And just before James gets on there,
sure.
So the things that you've outlined there for us,
Sure.
Our sales and reservation team are very, very pedantic. And what you've just said there is also very critical for audience to understand why the reservations team ask for as much medical information as possible that relates to our guests, so that when that guest is unconscious or unavailable to give us that information, we've got it handy, we can communicate it to you, and the whole system or the whole process is a lot more efficient. So I'm glad that you've outlined that for us.
Sure, and to elaborate on that a little bit further, one of the things we may ask for is the guest travel insurance, because at the end of the day, we might need to activate that guest travel insurance if we start looking at a repatriation, not to the nearest medical facility, but all the way back to their home country. So we need to activate that as soon as possible, let them know that there is a case ongoing and we've picked it up and we're starting to run with it. So that's one of the reasons there. James, sorry, carry on.
No problem. So I think you sort of hit the nail on the head with the flow charts, if you want to call it that, because that's exactly what we use, and that's exactly what we train. And getting that initial history or that assessment is vital in whatever decision we make going forward, because obviously there's a huge cost implication to yourselves, potentially to the client, and potentially to the camps, etc. So it's very important that these processes are followed meticulously. And one of the beauties, particularly with African bush camps, is they have such a good network with SATAB that allows these procedures to take place. And I can tell you one of your questions earlier, Beks, was what is the time frame? How long does this process take? It seems such a long winded process when somebody falls ill and then they phone SATAB and then SATAB phones us and what have you. That process is relatively quick. So it may seem that these processes are taking hours and hours to take place, but it's not. It's very quick. And with an integrated response with the training of the crew on the ground, it's a good flowing system which works well. And typically, once we get the activations from SATAB 24, we're airborne within an hour. So the timeframes are relatively quick. The biggest stumbling block, I think, is how long it takes to get cross-border, particularly with incidents now. So what it's forced us to do is make sure that we've got, we're better equipped with our facilities locally to take care of smaller cases that don't require repatriation outside the country. So this is all things that we're gearing up towards. But all a process, and it's so important that those processes are managed, and they are.
I think an hour is a great time, James, because from with us working together, if it's not a SATAB policyholder, say we're just running off a guest's policy, sometimes it could take hours for us to activate that policy, and obviously you can't go wheels up until you see that. So it's it's a tricky one.
Statistically, we monitor everything through our call center, which is from time that the call first comes in to the time of activation and delivery. And the biggest delay in the process is exactly what you've just said. So that is why it's so important that that we do work through you guys, because this saves time. Our average time for members that are not through SATAB is taking anything up to 6 hours to activate.
Wow.
Sure.
Well, that speaks into your organization, Simon. So well done to you and your team. Something that you've both mentioned, which is important to maybe touch on a little bit, and it's one of the questions that one of our audience members has asked. And I know that it's a bit difficult to say because it varies on a case-by-case basis. But the question really is, somebody comes out on safari, they usually take out up to $1 million worth of medical evacuation cover. That's $1 million per trip. What would you say about that? Can you give our audience some kind of guidelines? How much should they be maxing it out at as a minimum, perhaps? It's probably more your question here.
Sure. Okay. Well, it is an insurance-related question, and obviously, I'm not an insurance broker. I could give you an indication of from past experience of costs, and I think it really depends on the nationality of the person and where they need to go to. Does the insurance policy cover them to the most appropriate medical facility? In which case, the insurance limit can be a lot less. However, we have to bear in mind as well, if you have an incident in Vic Falls that requires some surgery or whatever, you could be looking at an international move, depending on the type of incident it will have. James will be able to elaborate more on that. But then that international move could still be to the most appropriate medical facility, in which case we could be going to into Joburg. If it's a case of that the guest needs to go for a full repatriation back to their home country, then we need to be looking, are we talking about Europe, or are we talking about going to the Americas or Russia? In which case those policy limits need to be a lot higher.
A lot higher than $1 million.
No, not higher than $1 million. $1 million is sufficient enough to move you pretty much anywhere in the world. But yeah.
Great. Yeah, that was the question from one of our audience members. I think that's pretty very helpful. Sure. Another question that we're getting, I know you said that it's a big hot debate and discussions, and I should imagine a lot of our insurance companies at the moment are very sort of wary of the whole COVID-19 in terms of ensuring that whether it's insurable or not. But let's put aside COVID. In general, do you think that SATAB will in the future offer some sort of service to trade partners or clients coming from the US or the UK or Europe or any one of those source markets, an opportunity to be able to insure them for medical evacuation cover?
Yes. So I know that they're about to launch a product which is going to cover global medical and security evacuations within the next 3 months. And so anyone, no matter where they are, would be able to take out this policy. So any guest could take it out. And it's got various different cover limits. But that's due to, I know there's talks, and it's due to come out fairly soon.
We look forward to hearing a lot more about that as the product rolls
Sure.
out. James, do you and your team get to go to these very remote places? What would you say is the most remote place or the most challenging evacuation that you've ever had to handle over the last few years?
Sure, Beks, that's an interesting question. You threw me off guard there. The nature of what we do entails a range of different medical conditions and various areas in which to go. One that strikes out the most was actually an evacuation that we were doing for one of your patients, or one of your clients, should I say, at Manga. I think one of the clients was in Kanga, and we landed with our King Air aircraft at the airstrip, and of course the team had to go and assess the patient in camp, and of course we had to sort of leave the aircraft sort of at the airstrip, and pilots were sort of inside the cockpit, and we arrived back after about an hour, after staying
like 40 degrees at like 40 degrees Celsius in the cockpit, right?
What had happened is a pack of lions had come and sought shelter underneath the wings in the shade. So the pilots couldn't get out the aircraft, and of course we couldn't get into the aircraft. So that was one of the most challenging evacs that we had in quite a remote area where you guys are situated. But yeah, the beauty is we've done evacuations as far north as Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, and each of them has got their own set of logistical problems that come with it. And but that's what we're up for. That's what the challenge is there for.
Absolutely. It's been very insightful to hear you both as professionals in the industry, to give us some sort of idea or insights into some of the things that actually happen out there, particularly around a very important subject, given the times. I just want to thank you both for your input. There will be follow-up questions from our audience that have got a ton of questions, but unfortunately we're unable to cover all of them now. And to our audience, thank you very much for joining us on this 9th episode, and we look forward to having you join us for the 10th episode. In the meantime, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on social media. And please send us through those questions, and we'll be happy to give you feedback. So thank you very much for being with us this evening. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.